Hello and welcome to Radical Disruption. I have a little surprise for you. This might actually not be a surprise by the time this episode launches. I'm not sure if I'm going to have announced this on Instagram by the time this launches or not. If not, then this is a really great surprise and for you only because you are a listener. But I am pregnant, and as I'm recording this right now, I'm about to enter into my second trimester of pregnancy. And the reason why I was thinking about this is because I went downstairs to grab a drink of water because I always get dry mouth anytime I'm doing these podcast episodes. And especially if I'm recording multiple of them like I am doing today. And so I grabbed a drink of water and I was walking back up the stairs to my office. And I had to sit for like 5 minutes because I was so out of breath from walking up the stairs before I could hit record on this episode. And also, if I'm talking and I sound like I'm out of breath, it's because I am out of breath because I'm pregnant. So anyways, that's a fun little surprise there. But all that to be said, that is not what this episode is about. This episode is about customer feedback. And so you hear all the time to collect testimonials and reviews and do that like crazy. And it's important. And I agree. It 100% is important. You know that it's important. I know that it's important. It is so important. And it obviously is going to help you to sell your offers and all of that. But what no one talks about, literally no one talks about this, is what do you do when negative feedback comes rolling in? Because we always assume, oh, you're going to collect the feedback and the testimonials and it's going to be positive and you're going to be able to screenshot that and post it on your Instagram stories and on your sales pages and it's all going to be rainbows and butterflies, which I would say majority of the time for most people that's going to be the case. But the truth is, and let's be real, it's going to happen. You're going to get negative feedback. And it doesn't matter how amazing your offer is, how proven your method or framework is, how much time that you spent creating that offer, people are still going to give negative feedback. Now, there's something that I want to make really, really super clear before I dive deeper into this episode, and that is all customer feedback is good feedback. It's positive, whether it's negative. Feedback is valuable because it shows you how people experience your offer. But here's the thing. Now, this is the key piece. Not all feedback means that you actually need to go out and do something about it, that you need to take action. And that's where I see a lot of business owners get stuck. And honestly, I've been there too, which I'll talk about here in just a second. But it's so easy to feel like every piece of advice every piece of feedback is advice that you need to add to your to-do list. But that's not the case. Feedback is just information. It is a data point, and you get to ultimately decide what you do with it. Now, I've been very fortunate to not have had a lot of negative feedback over my years, but of course, it still has happened. But I remember exactly what it felt like the very first time I got my first real negative piece of feedback. And I say real negative because there's like the trolls. There's positive feedback, there's negative feedback, and then there's just like the people who are just absolute downright mean. I'm not talking about that type of feedback. I'm talking about the actual negative feedback where someone, is like, I, didn't like this course, or I thought this course would have more modules, or, I didn't like the format of this, or I'm disappointed in XYZ aspect. Like that's more so what I'm talking about. But anyways, I remember exactly when that happened for the first time, when I got my very first negative piece of feedback, and it was actually on my course, Real Talk. And it came in the form of an email. And at first, when I read that email, I was so angry. Like I can actually feel the anger bubbling back up inside of me. Not because I'm angry now, but because I can imagine what like I felt like in that instant, because the anger was like so strong. I was so angry. As business owners, we put so much time and so much energy into what we create, and we believe in our offers with every ounce of our being, everything that we have. And so when someone then tells you that they don't like it, it's like, what do you mean you don't like it? Did you even go through that offer? Did you actually even implement what I taught you? And so that's what my thoughts were. And that email, it messed me up for days. I would read it and then I'd reread it and then I'd delete it and then I'd dig it back out of my trash. And I just could not stop spiraling. And I even started thinking like maybe I should just stop selling this course altogether. And when I finally got over that spiral, it took me a few days. It really did. My next instinct was to go completely overboard. So, of course, my instincts are always spot on, especially when I'm like heightened on emotions. And so I decided that the only logical response was to change everything about my course. And so I stayed up late one night reworking the course based on entirely just what this one person had said to me. So I think I created like 2 new trainings that night. I built out a workbook. I made so many, even just like small micro changes, which if you know which I know that when you're creating an offer, even the micro changes, they take so much time. And I was up, I swear, to like 1 or 2 in the morning making changes. And it was all because this one person didn't like specific aspects of this offer. And looking back, number one, I just laugh because it's funny, but I also realize how unnecessary that was because I don't know, obviously for a lot of reasons, I was very much overreacting. But in that moment, I genuinely thought that every piece of feedback meant that I had to actually take action, which was so far from the truth. And so this week, I got another piece of negative feedback on a different offer. And guess what I did with it? I did absolutely nothing. I did nothing. Why? Because there are 450 people in the offer that I got negative feedback on from this one person. And this is the only negative response that I've gotten, the only negative feedback. And I have been actively asking for feedback, and I've received plenty of positive responses. Obviously, many of them, which I have posted on like my sales pages and I've shared. But I have only received one negative response. And so, unless the feedback from one person points to something that is critical, like a tech glitch or something that's going to stop people from accessing the offer or like the actual experience in the offer, it's not worth overhauling everything for one person's opinion. Now, I'm not saying to ignore that feedback entirely because, again, I believe that all feedback, whether it's negative or positive, is good feedback. But here's what I recommend doing instead. Number one is to pause, let the feedback just sit. There's no knee jerk reactions, no late night spirals. If you're not going to think about it, I think, what is that saying? If you're not going to worry about it in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes pondering or sitting with it. I don't know, something along those lines. That's what I would say here is just pause, let it sit. It's totally okay. Then the next thing I want you to ask yourself is, what are the many saying? So one person's opinion, it doesn't equal a trend. It doesn't mean that every single person that is inside the offer is experiencing the offer in that way. Now, if more people over time were to share similar feedback, then I will 100% take action. But I'm looking at what are multiple people saying. And then the next thing that, not necessarily a question to ask yourself, but something to think about is, what is the context of the feedback? Not all feedback carries the same weight. Now, if you are, let's just say, doing a beta test for an offer and you brought in beta members to help you to refine that offer and make it better before you publicly launch it, and someone gives you feedback, whether that's positive or negative, obviously that's going to hold a lot of weight, right? Especially that negative feedback. It's probably something that you should take into account and actually implement, and that was the whole purpose of doing that beta, right? So context there. And if it's a new offer per se, and maybe it only has a few people in it, maybe you have 5, 10 people inside this offer, one person's feedback is going to hold a lot more weight, right? When there's less people inside. Now, if it's an established offer though, with 50, 100, hundreds of people inside, one-off feedback, it doesn't mean that you need to flip your offer upside down. It's a good piece of data, right? I'm going to keep that. I'm not going to just throw it out. I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to have it so that if I get negative feedback in the future, I can say, okay, this person's negative feedback says this one says this. Is there any overlap between these? And if there is, then maybe that means I actually do need to do something, right? Because that's a problem for multiple people. Context is everything, but really at the end of the day, when it comes to this negative feedback and whether or not you're implementing based on whatever the negative feedback was, implementing meaning that you're actually taking action on that feedback, I want you to look for patterns. What are the many saying? What are if you look at all of the feedback that you've gotten, how many of those are negative? How many of those are positive? What are the negatives saying? Are there multiple people saying the same thing? Collect each piece of feedback as data and then pause before reacting when the feedback rolls in. I hope that this episode was helpful, and I will catch you on the next one. All right, I'm actually adding in this part to the episode after I had recorded the main portion of this episode, because when I got done recording and actually started recording another episode, I was thinking about how I almost feel like I left you hanging there because I didn't actually talk about how to handle the negative feedback in the sense of what do you say? And so I have a script here that I'm going to read that I personally share when I get negative feedback. And this is specifically if they're not asking for a refund and if they've either emailed me or DM'd me or messaged me in some sort of way. Because if they just submitted the feedback into like a form, like a Google form, or if you're using Typeform or something like that, I'm personally not going to reach out unless I have follow-up questions based on something that they said in the form. So again, this is if they are not asking for a refund and they've messaged me with that feedback. This is the script that I use. I say, thank you for taking the time to share your feedback with me. I genuinely appreciate you letting me know about your experience, and I'm sorry to hear that it didn't meet your expectations. Your insights are valuable, and I'll use them to make improvements moving forward. Thank you again for reaching out. Now, if I'm curious to know more about what they might have to say, I might add this at the end of the email. Something along the lines of, if there's anything specific that you'd like to share or suggest, please feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear it. And I usually would add that on if they gave negative feedback, but it was kind of just like generalized negative feedback. And I'm curious to know if there's like something more specific that they had to say. Now, if they do want a refund, then I take this on a case-by-case basis, because even though I do have a no refund policy, and you might have a refund policy, and that's, obviously go based off of whatever your policy is, but I have a no refund policy, but I would rather refund someone than deal with a dispute. And sometimes if the person is like heated or I can tell that they're angry, I will just refund to just avoid any further issues. But again, that's on a case-by-case basis. I just want to add this little tidbit into the episode, and I hope that it was helpful.